Let me show you how a for loop works in Python. So we can do a for loop using the example of a list. So I create my list and let's see what I can do instead of maybe 1, 2, 3. Do it a little bit more complicated. 4 fours and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fives. I call that my list now. And if we execute it, it's a list with square brackets, and we have 5 items in that list. So a for loop, the idea of a for loop is to go through each of the items in an array and do something with it. And because that's a repetitive thing, we use a for loop to go through all of the items in that list, whatever the number of items is. So the syntax is for, and if we refer to item by item, we give it the name item, so variable name item, for item in this list, which is called my list. And the syntax requires that you put a colon at the end, start a new line, and indent, similar to what we know from the if condition. So my list is something that I've defined before. Item is something that will be created in the process of iteration, right? So you can give it whatever name you like to the item, doesn't really matter. And then item will be the individual item in that list. It will start from index 0 in that list, so the first item, which is the number 1, then take 22, then 333, and so on until it reaches the end of the list, and then the for loop will stop. So let's do the most simple thing, just print the item and execute the code. And you can see one by one the item in that list was taken, it was printed, and after the 5 items are printed, the for loop stops. An interesting thing is that this also works for nested arrays. So let's create a nested array. So let's say my list, let's just call it the same thing, doesn't matter, and we overwrite it. So let's create a nested array by putting a couple of tuples in that list. So maybe 1, 2, 3 tuples. And each tuple contains a pair of numbers. So the first is 1, 2, second is 3, 4, and the last is 5 and 6. So this is a list now that has 3 tuples as items, so 3 arrays within that overarching array, which is a list. And now we want to iterate through that new list, which is a nested array. So let's do that. So we'll start with the syntax for, and then because each item in this nested array is a pair, we can call it for pair in my list, colon, new line, indentation, and then print. What do we want to print? We want to print pair, of course. If we execute the code, we can see those 3 pairs, 1 in each line, 1, 2, first, then 3, 4, and finally 5, 6. That's nice, and you can see because we have a pair, and a pair is an array, we can index the array to get access to each of its items, which is now the tuple within the list. So let's do that. Let's repeat for pair in my list, print pair, and index it. Right? Because it has 2 members, we can give it either index 0 or 1. And if we print pair 0, then it means we'll only see the odd numbers here in this pair. If we then replace index 0 with index 1, we'll see the even numbers, which is 2, 4, 6. And of course it means that finally we can, if we just copy the code and make it slightly more complex, we can say within quotes first number of pair, that is. The first number is what? It's pair 0. And then we copy and append to the end, and then we say the second number is of course then accessed as index 1. And if we do this, we can see the first number and the second number, each of them can be dealt with separately to go through that list. Finally, we would like to have a way of accessing the index of a certain list item. So what we have done here, we have called pair each item in the list, but that's the item, it's not the index of the item. And I'll show you one way that we're going to use later on when we deal with larger data sets for how to do this. There's a way in Python of accessing the index of each of the members in a list. And the way to do it is to say for index, pair in my list. Not quite, because index and pair means we want to get two numbers out of that list, right? Pair, we know already. Pair is that thing, in this case, a tuple with two numbers. But if we say index, pair, we somehow have to create two numbers, and we do that by using a function called enumerate. And as an argument of the enumerate, we use that list. And of course, it needs to be followed by colon, new line, indentation. Have a look at it. By using enumerate and giving it the argument mylist, we have the possibility to get not only the item, which in this case is a tuple, but also to get the index of that item. So let's test it. Let's say print. Of course, we have index and pair. We can index, pair, print both things separated by comma. Let's see what it gets us. And that's right. We get the index on the left-hand side, which is 0, 1, 2. So there are 3 items in that list. And then we get the first pair, second pair, and third pair. And of course, you can access them individually if you like.